I want to talk about something that is getting almost no news coverage at all. And it's this. Liz Truss went off happily to Monsieur Macron's new creation, the European political community. Well, what on earth could be wrong with that? It sounds a bit like the EEC, doesn't it, all those years ago? Don't worry your poor little heads, it'll just be about trade. So I watched Truss going off there and thought, I wonder what's going on here. Then we discover she signed us up. Yes, we are going to be part of an EU-inspired military arrangement. Back in 2014, Nick Clegg was Deputy Prime Minister and challenged me to a series of head-to-head public debates. And this is what happened in one of those debates when I raised the subject of a European army. Listen in.
The whole point of this debate is 40 years on. 40 years ago, it was a common market. Now it's a European Union that wants an air force, an army, a navy, and wants to militarily intervene.
This is a dangerous fantasy. The idea that there's going to be a European air force, a European army, it is simply not true. The problem with people like Nigel Farage is they swing at windmills. They see conspiracies everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if Nigel Farage soon tells us that the moon landing was a fake, that Barack Obama isn't American, that Elvis isn't dead.
So there we are. I was as likely to be right as to deny the fact the moon landings had happened. I was a dangerous conspiracy theorist, according to our then Deputy Prime Minister, who, of course, saw the demise of his own party shortly afterwards. And in my view, folks, don't be long on Facebook shares, because that's where he is now. But we did sign up, and this is regrettable, in my opinion, or concerning at least. Liz Truss, at this European political community, did sign us up to a military deal on something that is called PESCO. I know you've never, ever heard of it, but it might just really matter. Yes, it's permanent, structured cooperation. And what is PESCO? Well, let me quote Joseph Borrell, who was the High Representative for the European Union on Foreign Affairs. This is what it actually is. PESCO is a decisive contribution for the development of Europe's capacity to act autonomously. It is key for the development of strong and integrated defence capabilities available to the European Union, which will allow us to react effectively to the most demanding circumstances. Now, they don't call it a European army, but if you think about the statement I've just read out to you, frankly, what's the difference? And given that NATO is based in Brussels and that NATO has existed for over 70 years, isn't it rather worrying that a parallel military structure is being created?
Politicians are warning that a tricky trade agreement called the Permanent Structured Cooperation, we're going to call it PESCO, could be used to pull the UK right back into the EU by military cooperation. Jim Fergusson is a former parliamentary candidate and a businessman and entrepreneur based in the UK. He's been warning about this issue, so thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here, Natalie. Thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, so can you explain this? You say that Ursula von der Leyen is sort of masterminding a way to re-encompass the UK in order to build out an army, which would then draw soldiers into a war, a land war against Russia or whoever else next.
Ursula von der Leyen is essentially looking at subsuming all of the militaries within the European Union member states. So she's wanting absolute control over all of them. It's not correct to call it an EU army. It is a defence union. And you're quite correct in pointing out about PESCO, and I'll explain what that means in a minute, because it's not what people think it is. However, what's really important here is that what they're going to want to do, and this will encompass British nuclear deterrence. So effectively, Germans, Ursula von der Leyen and her friends in Germany and Brussels, will be in charge of Britain's nuclear Trident fleet, along with the British military, the British Army, the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy. But it gets a lot worse than that, because they also want the security apparatus. Now, collectively, that's known as the Secret Intelligence Service, or the SIS. But that encompasses our internal security services, being MI5, and our foreign intelligence services, being MI6. But it also encompasses GCHQ in Cheltenham, which is a worldwide global listening post that deals with highly sensitive communications. Now, that also will go on to frontline policing. So it's not going to stop there. It will actually go on to policing and command structures there as well. The incredible thing is that this will also go into the industry with a single point command in and control overseen by Brussels. I mean, it goes back to even 1984 when Margaret Thatcher was in charge. They tried to do it then with her. She was having none of it. But when Tony Blair got into power, followed by the likes of Theresa May, of course, Richie Sunak, backed up by Jeremy Hunt, we are now witnessing potentially a major sellout of our British military capability, but also the British people.
So
and
can I just stop you and ask a question about intentionality then? Because I think that British voters might say, wait, we voted for Brexit. We voted not to be aligned with the European Union. And so is it, I called it sneaky in the beginning, but what you seem to be saying is that politicians understand that this is sort of a restitching of the bounds that were broken. So are you sort of saying that these politicians understand what they're doing, and this is maybe what one politician called a trade agreement that either replaces or reinforces NATO?
Yeah, well, I mean, what you've got is you've got some Conservative MPs that are being sort of mollycoddled. They're sort of being brought in and tempted to go along with this. But the Tory grandees that knew exactly what was involved, they thought that by going along with it, that they were going to get defence contracts for their own constituencies.
Oh,
but that's not going to happen, right? That's not going to happen because Ursula von der Leyen has stated that there will be one single EU-appointed defence contractor that will be chosen by Brussels, and it's the contractor for the whole arrangement. In other words, every bullet, every bomb, every artillery and tank round that's going to be manufactured by this single defence contractor will be chosen by Brussels. The UK will have no say in it. And she's gone on to say that there will be no negotiation. So it's important to point out they're not building an EU army. People have said they're building an EU army. They're not. They're simply taking over all the existing militaries within the frameworks that exist within their member states. And of course, you're quite correct to point out that Britain voted to leave. Britain voted for Brexit. However, what the people didn't realise was when it came to defence and security, that was not part of the arrangement. Theresa May signed that off before anybody could get a chance to analyse what was really going on. Now, the other really important thing here is that this will give them a full political union with tax implications. So that means that the British taxpayer could end up funding a lot of this, as if we didn't have enough to worry about. But the bureaucratic arrangements, they're already there. They're ready to go. And the civil servants think that it's going to be some kind of a la carte menu that they can choose what to take part in or what not to. No, it's all
and did they learn that from COVID? When yeah, right? Okay. That's a silly dream.
Yeah, it is. But in terms of a national veto, because some people have said, well, we'll have a national veto. If there's something that the EU are going to try to do, we've got a national veto. Well, Ursula von der Leyen has stated, and it's on the record, and she's basically said there will be no veto in defence and security. So you've got Cameron and Ritchie in there. They've already said to the defence heads of staff, there's no more funding for you. They've been denied in a number of meetings where the defence heads of department have said, look, we need more funding. If we're potentially going to fight a war with Russia, we need more funding. They've said, no, you're not getting it. But what they are trying to do, Natalie, is they're trying to basically sign over our military capability, our defence and security apparatus in its entirety. By the way, there is no pick and choose, and there is no national veto. If they do this, if these globalist parasites like Sunak and Hunt get away with doing this, then it's only a matter of time before they find themselves in a position where they've no national veto and our military are being deployed potentially in Ukraine to fight against Russia. But it gets worse because Ursula von der Leyen may well decide to call up the British reserves, the special forces, the paras, the Marines. It's all part of it. And then, of course, you've got conscription. They may decide they're really going to go for Russia and they're going to start to call up people, civilians, to put them into some kind of military capability. And we've seen the meat grinder that is the Ukraine-Russia war. And the last thing I want to see is that happening to British people. We've got enough to be concerned about without that. These people that are running the show are globalists. They are not loyal to the people of the countries that elect them. They're loyal to their globalist masters. In the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and many others. And it's high time that people realise that. And unfortunately, Boris Johnson, Joe Biden could have had a peace deal on the table. Russia was more than prepared to sit down and negotiate, and I believe they still might be. But the danger is that Britain is going to get dragged in, and our people and our military sacrificed on the altar of globalism to suit Ursula von der Leyen and her German high command. And I'll tell you something else. The thought of British nuclear capability being in the hands of the Germans just does not sit well with me, and it doesn't sit well with the British people. We must remember our history. 2 world wars caused by Germany. Let's hope there's not a third one.
I've been wondering why David Cameron's been slashing our armed forces, won't commit to 2%, is happy for us not to be able to defend our islands. I think Mr Juncker's given us the answer. We're going to do it at an EU level. We're going to have a European army. Now, when I raised this last year with the Deputy Prime Minister, Liberal Democrat Nick Clegg, he said it was a dangerous fantasy to even talk about an EU army. I hope every Liberal Democrat voter has heard Mr Verhofstadt today, the leader of the European Liberals, crying out for militarisation at an EU level. Of course, the truth is, it's already happening. We already have a European Defence Agency. We already have EU battle groups on active service all over the world. We already have an EU Navy active against the Somali pirates, and who can forget Eurocorps here in Strasbourg last year, virtually goose-stepping that ghastly flag round the courtyard outside. And of course the Lisbon Treaty, Article 28, provides for all of this. Tony Blair was right. He said the European Union is not a project about peace, it's a project about power. And I think Mr Juncker is trying to seize on an opportunity. We ourselves in the European Union provoked the conflict through our territorial expansionism in the Ukraine. We poked the Russian bear with a stick, and unsurprisingly, Putin reacted. But this now is to be used as an opportunity to build a European army. And when, Mr Juncker, Mr Verhofstadt, I know that by heckling you increase your hits on YouTube, because otherwise nobody in Europe wants to listen to you, and the President really ought to let me speak.
Just a moment, please. Just a moment.
Thank you.
Mr Farage, just a moment, please. Just a moment, please. Just a moment. Mr Verhofstadt, I turn to you. I have to ask you, please, to calm down. You may not like this speech, but we are Democrats and we listen to you too. So please do not interrupt.
Well, we certainly are Democrats, and we've never shouted you down, but you always try and shout us down. The point I was making is this. The opportunity is being seized, and Mr Juncker said we must convey to Russia that we are serious. Who do you think you are kidding, Mr Juncker? We do not want any part of an EU army, and I doubt the rest of the peoples of Europe do either. Thank you. Well, it's a bit of fun.
The government should be able to say more than strong and stable, and it's wrong to believe the fable that I belong at the negotiating table.